The skies over Grenell had been peaceful for nearly a decade. Ever since the end of the Great Galactic War in 2442, this frontier settlement had known relative calm, as much calm as one could expect on the edges of human-controlled space. The colony's inhabitants had rebuilt their lives from the ashes of conflict, forging new communities among the ruins of what once was. Joro watched the sunset from the old watchtower, his slender frame perched precariously on the edge of the crumbling structure. At 16, he was small for his age, with delicate features that belied his past. Most who met him saw only a quiet boy with haunted eyes. Few knew of the blood that had once stained his hands in the fighting pits of Zari Prime. "You'll catch cold sitting out here all night," came a gruff voice from behind. Joro didn't turn. He recognized his great-grandfather's voice, the familiar wheeze that accompanied each breath. "I like watching the stars come out. Pops." The old man settled beside him with a grunt, joints creaking in protest. At 123, Old Man Kavi was a relic of a different era, a time before the war, before humanity had been scattered across the stars. "You're thinking about the arena again." It wasn't a question. Joro nodded slightly. "Today marks 5 years since I escaped." Kavi placed a weathered hand on Joro's shoulder. "You survived, boy. That's what matters. What those Zari bastards made you do, that wasn't your choice. But it had been Joro's hands that had crushed the life from other slaves in the gladiatorial pits. His feet that had danced through pools of blood for the entertainment of alien overlords. His voice that had cried out in victory while other children lay dead at his feet. "The settlers still look at me differently," Joro murmured. "They know what I was." "They know what was done to you," Kavi corrected. "There's a difference." A flash of light in the sky caught Joro's attention. Then another. Streaks of white fire cutting through the darkening purple of dusk. "Ships," Kavi said, squinting upward. "Too many for normal traffic." Joro's muscles tensed instinctively. Years of combat training had left him with reflexes that never truly relaxed. "Military?" Before Kavi could answer, the colony's alarm system blared to life. Its wailing cry echoed across the settlement, a sound not heard since the final days of the war. "Get to the shelter," Joro said, already on his feet. "I'll find you there." Kavi grasped his great-grandson's wrist with surprising strength. "Don't do anything foolish, boy. You're not in the arena anymore." Joro nodded and helped the old man to his feet. Together, they descended the watchtower's spiral staircase, separating at the bottom as Kavi joined the stream of settlers heading toward the underground bunkers. Instead of following, Joro ran toward the military compound at the colony's edge. The training yard was already bustling with activity when he arrived, soldiers rushing to battle stations while officers shouted orders above the din. "Civilian, get to shelter immediately!" A young soldier blocked Joro's path. "I need to speak with Lieutenant Mara," Joro insisted. "Tell her Joro is here." The soldier hesitated, then spoke into his comm unit. After a brief exchange, he gestured toward a nearby prefab structure. "Command center, 2 minutes. Then you're out." Inside, tactical displays showed what Joro had already suspected. A Zari battle fleet had entered Grenell's airspace, the first sighting of the alien race in this sector since the armistice. Lieutenant Mara stood at the center console, her tall frame bent over holographic projections. At 30, she was the youngest officer to command Grenell's defense force, respected for both her tactical brilliance and her unflinching courage. She glanced up as Joro entered. "This isn't a good time, Joro," she said, though her expression softened slightly. Since discovering the ex-Gladiator boy living with Old Man Kavi 2 years ago, she'd taken an interest in his rehabilitation. "What are they doing here?" Joro asked, ignoring the dismissal. "The treaty is apparently worth less than the data it's stored on," Mara finished. 3 battlecruisers and a support fleet. They're holding position just outside our defensive perimeter. One of the tactical officers called out, "Incoming transmission, Lieutenant." The main display flickered, revealing the rigid, carapace-covered face of a Zari commander. Their segmented eyes glittered like black gems against iridescent blue skin. "Humans of Grenell." The alien voice rasped through the translator. "We claim this sector under ancient right. Your presence violates Zari sovereign territory." You have 24 Earth hours to evacuate before we reclaim what is ours." The transmission cut off, leaving the command center in stunned silence. "They can't be serious," one of the officers muttered. Grenell was ceded to humanity in the Treaty of New Saturn. Lieutenant Mara's expression hardened. "Alert Coalition Command. Request immediate reinforcements." She turned to Joro, who stood frozen, staring at the place where the Zari commander's face had been. "Joro, you need to go." But Joro wasn't listening. His mind had transported him back to the fighting pits, to the jeering crowds of Zari spectators, to the smell of alien blood on his knuckles. His breathing quickened. "Joro," Mara's voice cut through his panic. "Get to the shelter, now!" He nodded mechanically and turned to leave. Outside, chaos had erupted as settlers rushed to gather essentials before heading underground. Coalition soldiers directed the flow of civilians, their faces grim with the knowledge that their limited defenses were no match for a Zari battle fleet. Instead of joining the evacuees, Joro found himself drawn to the athletic fields behind the colony school. The training area was deserted now, equipment left scattered in the rush to reach safety. He approached the discus-throwing circle, a sport he'd taken up during his rehabilitation, a way to channel his strength into something that wasn't violence. He picked up one of the heavy metal discs, feeling its weight in his palm. In the gladiatorial arenas, he'd been forced to train with weights 3 times those used by adult men. The Zari had bred him, engineered him, for combat from the moment they'd taken him as an infant. Anger bubbled up inside him, a familiar heat spreading through his muscles. Before he could stop himself, Joro wound up and hurled the discus with all his might. The metal disc shot through the air like a bullet, far beyond the normal throwing field, past the perimeter fence, and into the dense forest beyond. A distant crash echoed back to him. "Shit," he muttered, immediately regretting the outburst. He'd been working so hard to control his strength, to appear normal. A shadow passed overhead, a Zari scout ship making a low pass over the colony. Without thinking, Joro grabbed another discus and flung it upward. The metal disc arced through the air, its trajectory intersecting perfectly with the alien craft. There was a brilliant flash as the discus punctured the ship's hull, followed by the screech of tearing metal. The scout ship lurched sideways, smoke pouring from the breach as it spiraled toward the ground beyond the colony's edge. Joro stood motionless, shocked by what he'd done. A moment later, alarms blared with renewed urgency. He'd just provoked an interplanetary incident with a throw of a training discus. What the hell was that? Lieutenant Mara appeared beside him, breathless from running. Her eyes tracked the smoke trail of the downed scout ship, then returned to Joro. "I didn't mean to," he began. "You did that?" Disbelief colored her voice. "With a discus?" Before Joro could respond, the ground beneath them shook as Zari fighters screamed overhead, weapon systems already engaging colony defenses. The war he'd escaped 5 years ago had found him again. "Come with me." Mara grabbed his arm. "Now." As explosions lit up the evening sky, Joro allowed himself to be led away, knowing that his moment of anger had just accelerated the timetable for Grenell's destruction, and revealed a secret he'd fought to keep buried since his escape from the fighting pits. He wasn't just an ex-gladiator. He was something the Zari had created to be much, much worse. The holding cell was sparse, a cot, a sink, and a reinforced door with a small observation window. Joro sat with his back against the wall, knees drawn to his chest, counting his breaths the way Kavi had taught him to manage his anxiety. He wasn't technically under arrest. Lieutenant Mara had called it protective custody, though the locked door suggested otherwise. Outside, he could hear the muffled sounds of the colony's defense systems engaging Zari fighters. Occasional tremors shook the building when enemy weapons found their mark. The door slid open, revealing Mara flanked by 2 armed guards. Her uniform was smudged with soot, and a fresh cut marred her left cheek. "We need to talk," she said, dismissing the guards with a nod. When they were alone, she sat across from him on the cot. "That scout ship you downed, the pilot survived. He's demanding to know what weapon we used." Joro stared at his hands. "You told them? That a teenager with a discus punctured Zari battle armor?" "No." She leaned forward. "Joro, I've seen the medical scans we took when you first arrived. I know you're different. But what I saw today goes beyond unusual muscle density or heightened reflexes. I was their prototype, Joro said quietly. Before the Gladiator program expanded, they experimented with genetic engineering, cybernetic enhancements, bone replacements. Most subjects died. I survived. Mara's expression remained neutral, but her eyes betrayed her shock. Why didn't you tell us? Because I didn't want to be a weapon anymore. The words burst from him with unexpected force. I just wanted to be normal, to live with Pops, to go to school like everyone else. A distant explosion rocked the building, causing dust to drift down from the ceiling. Mara glanced upward, then back at Joro. The Zari have begun bombardment of our outer defenses, she said. Coalition reinforcements are at least 48 hours away. By then, there won't be a colony left to defend. I'm sorry about the scout ship, Joro mumbled. I lost control. I'm not here to scold you, Joro. Mara's voice softened. I'm here because we need your help. He looked up sharply. My help? Whatever they did to you, whatever makes you strong enough to down a Zari ship with a sports implement, we need it. The colony needs it. Joro shook his head. You don't understand. I killed other kids in those arenas, children who begged for mercy while Zari crowds cheered. I promised myself I'd never fight again. This isn't a gladiator match, Mara countered. This is survival. If the Zari retake Grenell, how long before they restart their breeding programs, their experiments? How many more children will become what you were? The question hit Joro like a physical blow. He'd spent 5 years trying to forget, to bury the memories of what had been done to him, and what he'd done to others. But Mara's words forced him to confront the reality that his past wasn't just his burden. It was a warning of what could happen again. Another explosion, closer this time. The lights flickered. What would you have me do? He asked finally. I'm still just one person. Mara stood. Come with me. There's something you need to see. The guards escorted them through the military compound to an underground hangar Joro hadn't known existed. Inside, a team of engineers and scientists hovered around what appeared to be fragments of Zari technology, pieces of ships and weapons recovered from previous conflicts. Dr. Eleanor Voss, the colony's chief scientist, approached as they entered. A tall woman with steel-gray hair pulled into a severe bun. She had the perpetually distracted air of someone whose mind operated several steps ahead of her surroundings. Lieutenant, this is highly irregular, she began, eyeing Joro suspiciously. Civilians aren't authorized. He's not just a civilian, Doctor, Mara interrupted. Show him what you've been working on. With obvious reluctance, Dr. Voss led them to a central workstation where a large piece of Zari hull material was suspended in a testing rig. It gleamed with an unnatural blue-black sheen under the harsh laboratory lights. Zari battle armor, Voss explained, the same material that covers their ships, their weapons, even their combat exoskeletons. We've been studying it for years, trying to understand its properties. Joro approached cautiously. He recognized the material instantly. It was the same substance that had covered the walls of the fighting pits, that had armored the guards who'd overseen his training. It's a molecular composite, Voss continued. Far beyond our manufacturing capabilities, it absorbs and redistributes kinetic energy, making it nearly impervious to conventional weapons. Even our most powerful railguns barely scratch it. Yet you punctured it with a discus, Mara said to Joro. How? All eyes turned to him. Joro swallowed hard, feeling the weight of their expectations. I don't know exactly, he admitted. In the arena, they'd sometimes make us fight against guards wearing armor. I learned that if you hit it at exactly the right angle, with enough force... He trailed off. Show us, Dr. Voss challenged. Joro hesitated, then approached the suspended hull fragment. It was roughly a meter square, thicker than his arm. He ran his fingers over its cool surface, feeling the almost imperceptible hexagonal pattern beneath the smoothness. The molecular structure aligns under pressure, he explained, remembering the lessons beaten into him by Zari trainers. But between each pattern is a microsecond of vulnerability. He drew back his fist, focusing on a point near the center of the fragment. Then, with a motion too fast for the observers to fully track, he struck. The impact made no sound, but the effect was immediate. The hull piece shattered like glass, fragments cascading to the floor in a glittering shower. The room fell silent. Dr. Voss approached the destruction with wide eyes, kneeling to examine the pieces. "Impossible," she whispered. "We've hit this material with forces 10 times greater than what a human being should be capable of generating." "I told you he was special," Mara said. Joro looked at his hand. There wasn't even a mark on his knuckles. "What do you want from me, Lieutenant?" "A chance," she replied. "A chance for Grenell to survive this invasion." Before Joro could respond, an officer burst into the lab. "Lieutenant! The Zari have breached our upper atmosphere! They're deploying ground forces!" Mara's expression hardened. "Doctor, evacuate your team to the bunkers. Joro, come with me." As they rushed through the compound toward the command center, Joro's mind raced. 5 years of trying to be normal, of suppressing his abilities, of pretending to be just another refugee, all undone in an instant of anger with a thrown discus. "I'm not a soldier," he protested as they ran. "No," Mara agreed. "You're something they've never planned for. A weapon they created, turned against them." The command center was in chaos when they arrived. Tactical displays showed multiple Zari landing craft descending toward the colony's outskirts. Coalition forces were deploying to defensive positions, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. "Status report," Mara barked. First wave of ground forces touching down in sectors 7 and 9. An officer responded, "Approximately 200 combat units. Our perimeter defenses are holding for now, but their battlecruisers are positioning for another bombardment." Joro studied the tactical display. The Zari were using standard invasion procedures, the same strategies he'd been forced to study in preparation for arena combat simulations. Their predictability might be an advantage. "They'll target communication arrays first," he said, pointing to key infrastructure on the display. "Then power generation. They want to isolate the colony before the main assault." Mara glanced at him, surprised. "You're sure?" "It's how they operate. Zari battle doctrine hasn't changed in centuries." She nodded. "Redirect defensive resources to those locations." To Joro, she added, "What else do you know?" For the next hour, Joro found himself in the unprecedented position of advising coalition military officers on Zarhi tactics and vulnerabilities. He detailed weak points in their armor, gaps in their formation strategies, and the hierarchical command structure that made them vulnerable if key officers were eliminated. As night fell completely, the first assault began. Zari ground forces struck from multiple directions, testing the colony's defenses. Coalition soldiers fought bravely, but the technological gap was evident. Regular updates reached the command center, each more dire than the last. "Sector 9 has fallen," came one report. "We're regrouping at the secondary line." "Medical facilities at capacity," said another, requesting additional support. Joro listened with growing dread. This was his fault. His impulsive action had accelerated the Zari timetable, giving the colony less time to prepare or evacuate. "We need to counterattack," Mara stated, studying the tactical display. "Hit them where they don't expect it." "That would be suicide." One of her officers protested, "Our forces are barely holding the defensive line." "Not a conventional attack," Mara clarified. She turned to Joro. "A precision strike. Target one of their landing craft. Disable it before they can deploy more troops." The implication was clear. She wanted him to use his abilities directly against the Zari. "I told you, I'm not a weapon," Joro said, his voice tight. "Look at this," Mara commanded, pointing to live feeds from the colony's perimeter. Buildings burned. Coalition soldiers dragged wounded comrades to safety. Civilians who hadn't reached the shelters in time huddled in makeshift barricades. "This is happening because of what the Zari are, because of what they do. Not because you downed one scout ship." Deep down, Joro knew she was right. The Zari had been planning this invasion. His actions had merely changed the timing. Still, the thought of deliberately using his strength, of fighting again. "I need to see my great-grandfather first," he said finally. "If I'm going to do this, I need his blessing." Mara nodded. "We'll escort you to the shelter, but we need to move fast." The journey to the civilian bunkers took them through areas already damaged by the initial bombardment. Joro saw the colony through new eyes, The schools, homes, and community spaces he'd come to cherish, now scarred by weapons fire and debris. This wasn't just a military outpost. It was the closest thing to a home he'd known since being taken by the Zarhi as an infant. In the underground shelter, hundreds of civilians had crowded into spaces designed for half their number. Children cried, adults spoke in hushed, worried tones, and medical personnel moved through the crowd tending to those injured during the evacuation. Kavi sat on a cot in the far corner, his ancient eyes lighting up when he spotted his great-grandson. "I knew you'd find trouble," the old man said as Joro knelt beside him. "They know what I am, Pops," Joro said quietly. "Lieutenant Mara wants me to fight." Kavi's weathered hand found Joro's cheek. "And what do you want, boy?" "I want this to be over. I want everyone to be safe." Joro hesitated. "But I don't want to be what they made me." "Listen to me." Kavi leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "What flows through your veins, what strengthens your bones and muscles, that came from the Zarhi. Yes, but what beats in your heart? That's human. That's yours." Tears welled in Joro's eyes. "I'm scared of what I might become if I start fighting again." "You're not fighting for their entertainment now. You're fighting for these people." Kavi gestured to the frightened civilians around them. "That makes all the difference." A distant explosion shook dust from the ceiling. The Zarhi bombardment was intensifying. "Go," Kavi said. "Show them what humanity's gladiator can do." Joro embraced his great-grandfather, then stood with newfound resolve. When he rejoined Mara at the shelter entrance, his expression had changed. The uncertain boy was gone, replaced by something older, harder. "I'll do it," he said, "but I need one thing first." "Name it." "Information on the Zarhi command ship. That's our target." As they hurried back to the military compound, Joro felt the familiar pre-combat calm settling over him, a detached state of hyper-awareness he'd developed in the arenas. Part of him hated how naturally it returned, like slipping into an old, blood-stained garment. But another part recognized its value now, when so many lives depended on his success. The battle for Grenell had entered its second phase, and he was about to become its most unexpected weapon. Dawn broke over a colony transformed by a single night of warfare. Smoke rose from structures hit during the bombardment. Coalition forces had been pushed back to a defensive perimeter half the size of their original territory. Zarhi troops controlled the outskirts, methodically advancing behind the cover of their superior technology. In a makeshift strategy room converted from a storage facility, Joro studied holographic projections of the invading fleet. Lieutenant Mara had gathered a small team of Special Forces operators, men and women who'd fought in the Great Galactic War and survived against impossible odds. "This is the Zarhi command vessel." Mara indicated a massive battlecruiser hovering at the edge of the atmosphere. "Designation Vorak. According to our intelligence, it's coordinating the entire invasion force." Joro recognized the ship class immediately. Annihilator pattern battlecruiser, central command bridge, multiple weapon emplacements, crew of approximately 800. One of the Special Forces soldiers, a grizzled veteran named Dax, eyed Joro skeptically. "And what exactly is your plan, kid? Throw rocks at it until it goes away?" "Sergeant," Mara warned. "It's a fair question," Joro admitted. "The Vorak is too heavily armored for a direct assault, even with my abilities. But we don't need to destroy it, just disrupt their command structure long enough for coalition reinforcements to arrive." "How?" another soldier asked. Joro pointed to a section of the hologram. "Secondary engine housing. The armor is thinner there to allow for heat dispersion. If we can breach it and damage the propulsion systems, the ship will need to divert resources from the invasion to prevent a catastrophic failure." "And how do we get to this engine housing?" Dax challenged. "In case you haven't noticed, we're a little short on spacecraft capable of reaching orbit." Joro turned to Mara. "The downed scout ship, the one I hit, is it intact enough to fly?" A slow smile spread across Mara's face. "Possibly. Our engineers have been examining it since it crashed. Zarhi scout ships are designed for atmospheric operations, but they can reach low orbit in an emergency," Joro explained. If we can repair it enough for a one-way trip, we can approach the Vorak under the guise of a damaged vessel returning to base. And then what? Dax pressed. Even if we get close, their internal security will cut us down before we reach any vital systems. Not if they're dealing with multiple breaches, Joro countered. We create a diversion at the main docking bay while a smaller team targets the engine housing. For the next several hours, the group refined the plan. Coalition engineers worked frantically to repair the downed scout ship, while Joro shared everything he knew about Zari vessel layouts and security protocols. The knowledge that had been beaten into him as a child gladiator now served a purpose he could believe in. By midday, they were ready. The modified scout ship could barely accommodate 4 people, Joro, Mara, Dax, and a coalition engineer named Suri who understood Zari propulsion systems. The rest of the Special Forces team would coordinate ground operations to keep the Zari troops occupied and prevent them from recalling resources to the Vorak. As they prepared to board, Dr. Voss approached with a small device. Neural disruptor, she explained, handing it to Mara. Calibrated to Zari brainwave patterns, short range, but it should incapacitate any guards you encounter without triggering ship-wide alarms. Mara nodded her thanks. Any word from Coalition Command? Reinforcements are pushing their engines to the limit. Voss replied, but they're still at least 36 hours out. Then we'd better get moving. Mara turned to her team. This is a volunteer mission with minimal chances of success. Last chance to back out. No one moved. Let's go kill some bugs, Dax said, using the derogatory term for the insectoid-like Zari. The repaired scout ship was a cramped, uncomfortable vessel designed for Zari physiology. The 4 humans squeezed into seats meant for the more angular alien bodies, surrounded by controls labeled in the harsh pictographs of the Zari language. Can you fly this thing? Mara asked as Joro took the pilot's position. Theoretically, he replied, hands hovering over the unfamiliar controls. They made us learn basic operations as part of combat training. Never actually flew one, though. Wonderful, Dax muttered. We're going to die before we even reach the enemy. Joro ignored him, focusing on the sequence he'd been taught. The ship's engines hummed to life, vibrating through the deck plates. Outside, Coalition ground forces had cleared a makeshift landing pad, providing cover as the unusual craft prepared for takeoff. Hold on, Joro warned as he activated the main thrusters. The scout ship lurched upward with far more power than he'd anticipated, nearly flipping end over end before he managed to stabilize it. The ground fell away rapidly as they ascended through Grenell's atmosphere, the colony quickly shrinking to a collection of tiny structures surrounded by the encroaching Zari forces. We're being hailed, Suri reported from the communication station, Zari battle language. Can you respond? Mara asked. Suri shook her head. I can receive, but our transmitter was damaged in the crash. That works in our favor, Joro said, adjusting their course toward the looming shape of the Vorak. They'll assume communications are down and direct us to an emergency docking procedure. As predicted, the massive battlecruiser began transmitting automated docking instructions, a sequence of pulses that guided their approach to a secondary hangar bay. Joro followed the beacon, hands steady despite the growing knot of fear in his stomach. He was returning to the race that had created him, enslaved him, forced him to kill for their entertainment. Remember, Mara said quietly beside him, we're not here for revenge. We're here to save Grenell. Joro nodded, grateful for the reminder. Revenge was the path back to becoming the weapon the Zari had intended. Purpose, protection, that was the human path. The hangar bay doors parted to admit their damaged craft. Inside, Zari maintenance drones and a handful of technicians awaited what they assumed was a returning scout vessel. The surprise on their alien faces might have been comical under different circumstances as the 4 humans emerged, weapons ready. Dr. Voss's neural disruptor worked precisely as promised. The Zari technicians collapsed without raising an alarm, their segmented bodies twitching as their nervous systems overloaded. Phase 1 complete, Mara whispered. Now for the hard part. They moved swiftly through the battlecruiser's service corridors, avoiding the main thoroughfares where Zari crew members would be concentrated. Joro led the way, his perfect recall of Zari ship layouts guiding them toward the engine section. Wait, he hissed suddenly, halting the group. Security checkpoint ahead. Around the corner, two armored Zari guards stood at attention, flanking a security door that led to the engineering decks. Unlike the technicians, these were warrior-caste Zari, their exoskeletons enhanced with the same battle armor that covered the ship's hull. The disruptor won't penetrate their helmets, Mara assessed. We need another approach. Joro studied the guards, noting the slight differences in their stance, the positioning of their weapons. I can handle them, but it won't be quiet. Dax checked his weapon. Once we breach that door, stealth is over anyway. Do what you need to do, kid. Taking a deep breath, Joro stepped into the corridor. The guards instantly raised their weapons, plasma rifles capable of vaporizing human tissue on contact. Zari warriors, Joro called out in their own language, the harsh syllables scraping his throat. Do you recognize what stands before you? The guards hesitated, mandibles clicking in confusion at the humans speaking their tongue. Impossible, one of them hissed. A slave speak. Joro moved faster than the Zari could track, crossing the distance between them in a blur. His first strike shattered the lead guard's rifle. His second cracked the reinforced carapace of the alien's chest piece. The guard slumped to the ground, dark ichor seeping from the breach in its armor. The second guard managed to fire a single shot that Joro deflected with his forearm, the plasma blast dissipating harmlessly against his engineered skin. A moment later, that guard too lay motionless on the deck. Mara, Dax, and Suri emerged from hiding, their expressions a mixture of awe and unease at the display of Joro's abilities. The ship will detect the weapon's discharge, Suri warned. We have minutes at most before they lock down this section. Then we move faster. Mara decided. She approached the security door, placing Voss's neural disruptor against the control panel. The device emitted a high-pitched whine, and the door slid open. Beyond lay the vast engineering section of the Vorak, a cathedral of alien technology humming with the power that drove the massive vessel. Zari engineers moved between workstations, monitoring systems and adjusting parameters for the ongoing orbital operations. The secondary engine housing is 2 levels down. Joro pointed to a maintenance shaft. That's our target. Alarms began to wail throughout the ship, their presence discovered. Zari engineers looked up in confusion, then panic as they spotted the human intruders. Go, Mara ordered. Dax, Suri, create a diversion. Joro and I will hit the engine. As Dax and Suri engaged the Zari engineers, drawing attention and fire, Joro led Mara to the maintenance shaft. They descended rapidly, the sounds of battle fading above them. 2 levels down, they emerged into a narrow corridor lined with pulsing energy conduits, the nerve center of the ship's propulsion system. There. Joro pointed to a reinforced door at the corridor's end. Secondary engine control. If we can breach the plasma containment system, the ship will have to divert all resources to prevent a core meltdown. They approached cautiously, aware that such a critical system would have additional security. Sure enough, as they neared the door, a hidden defensive system activated. Energy barriers sprang to life, separating them from their target. Can we disable it? Mara asked, examining the shimmering barrier. Joro placed his hand near the energy field, feeling its heat. Not quickly, but there's another way. He pointed to the ceiling above the barrier. The power conduits run through there. If I can reach them... Do it, Mara decided, taking up a defensive position to cover his attempt. Joro backed up several paces, then ran forward and leaped. His enhanced muscles propelled him upward with impossible force. He punched through the ceiling panels, grasping the exposed support structure and pulling himself into the maintenance crawlspace above. Inside the cramped space, he navigated between massive power conduits carrying enough energy to power a small city. The heat was intense, but his engineered body could withstand temperatures that would cook an ordinary human. He moved carefully until he was directly above the engine control room. With a powerful kick, Joro shattered the ceiling beneath him and dropped into the control center. 3 Zari engineers spun to face the intruder, their mandibles clicking in alarm. Before they could react, Joro was upon them, incapacitating each with precise strikes that left them unconscious rather than dead. He rushed to the main control panel, scanning the alien symbols until he found what he was looking for, the plasma containment protocols. As a gladiator, He'd been forced to study Zari technology in case arena combat ever required sabotage objectives. Now, those lessons served a greater purpose. With quick, deliberate movements, Joro initiated an emergency venting sequence in the secondary engine. Warning lights flashed across the control board as the ship's AI detected the unauthorized command. "Engine containment breach detected," announced an artificial voice in the Zari language. "Emergency protocols engaged. All non-essential operations suspended." The door to the control room slid open as Mara finally gained access. "Did it work?" she asked, rushing to join him. Joro nodded. "They'll have to divert power from weapons and shields to maintain containment. It buys the colony time, but—" He frowned at the control panel, where a new alert had appeared. "What is it?" Mara pressed. "The ship's AI. It's initiating a security protocol I've never seen before." Joro's hands moved across the controls, trying to access more information. "Something called contingency harvest." The main display shifted, showing a detailed scan of the colony below. Target points appeared over key infrastructure and population centers. "They're not retreating," Joro realized with growing horror. "They're accelerating their attack. The Vorak is redirecting all remaining weapon power to a concentrated orbital strike." Mara's face paled. "How long?" "Minutes, maybe less." Joro studied the display, mind racing. "We need to disable their primary weapons array completely, not just divert power." "How? We barely managed to reach this section." Joro's gaze fell on a maintenance access point marked in Zari script, a direct conduit to the central power core that fed the ship's primary weapons. "There's a way," he said quietly, "but I'll have to go alone." Mara followed his gaze, understanding dawning on her face. "That's a suicide run. The radiation levels in those conduits would kill even a protected technician in minutes." "I'm not a normal technician," Joro reminded her. "The Zari built me to withstand conditions that would kill others. It's what made me valuable in their arenas." Before Mara could protest further, the ship lurched violently. The engine venting had begun, throwing the massive vessel slightly off its orbital position. "Get back to Dax and Suri," Joro instructed. "Find the scout ship or an escape pod. Get clear of the Vorak." "I'm not leaving you behind," Mara insisted. Joro placed a hand on her shoulder. "This isn't about me, Lieutenant. It's about everyone on Grenell. About Pops and all the others who gave me a home when I escaped. Please." After a moment's hesitation, Mara nodded. "How will you get out?" A sad smile crossed Joro's face. "One problem at a time." As Mara reluctantly departed, Joro turned to the maintenance access. The narrow tunnel would lead him directly to the heart of the Vorak, its central power distribution nexus. There, he could sever the connections to the weapon systems permanently. He pried open the access panel and squeezed his slender frame into the cramped passage. Almost immediately, warning sensors on the walls began to flash red, detecting the dangerous radiation levels that permeated this section of the ship. Joro felt it immediately, a burning sensation across his skin, a metallic taste in his mouth. But he pressed on, crawling through the increasingly hot tunnel toward the ship's core. The passage opened into a vast spherical chamber, the central nexus where all the Vorak's power systems converged. Suspended in the center was a pulsating orb of contained plasma, so bright it hurt to look at directly. Around it, a complex web of conduits and distribution nodes channeled energy to different ship systems. Joro dropped to the maintenance catwalk that circled the chamber. The radiation here was intense enough that his vision began to blur at the edges. Even with his enhanced physiology, he knew he had minutes at most before permanent damage would occur. He located the main conduits feeding the weapons array, massive tubes glowing with barely contained energy. To sever them would require more strength than he'd ever had to summon before. As he approached, a voice echoed through the chamber, not over speakers, but directly in his mind. "Asset J7293 detected. Primary gladiatorial prototype. Status: escaped." Joro froze. The ship was speaking to him, or rather, the ship's AI was accessing the neural implants the Zari had placed in his brain as a child. "You are malfunctioning. Asset J7293, the voice continued. Return to reprogramming for assessment. I'm not your asset, Joro growled, pushing forward despite the intrusion in his mind. Not anymore. Incorrect. You are Zari property. Your genetic structure, your enhancements, all designed by Zari science. You exist to serve. Joro reached the main conduit junction, placing his hands on the superheated metal. Pain lanced through his palms, but he maintained his grip. I exist to protect, he corrected. The people of Grenell, my great-grandfather, humanity. Sentiment is a defect. The AI responded. A failure in your programming that will be corrected when you are reclaimed. Images flooded Joro's mind. Memories of the arena, of his training, of the lives he'd taken at the Zari's command. But interspersed with them came newer memories. Kavi teaching him to fish in Grenell's lakes. Children at the colony school inviting him to join their games. Lieutenant Mara believing in his humanity when he doubted it himself. I'm not your weapon, Joro declared, his muscles straining as he began to bend the massive conduit. I never was. The metal groaned under his grip, the superheated material beginning to warp. Alarms blared throughout the chamber as the ship detected the critical failure about to occur. Destruction of core distribution systems will result in cascade failure. The AI warned, you will be destroyed. Maybe, Joro acknowledged, continuing to bend the conduit until hairline fractures appeared in its surface. But so will your weapons. With a final surge of strength, Joro wrenched the conduit completely out of alignment. Plasma energy erupted from the breach, a torrent of destructive power that immediately began melting surrounding systems. Chain reactions spread throughout the Nexus as safety systems failed one after another. Critical failure imminent, the AI announced, its voice distorting as its systems began to shut down. Evacuation protocols activated. Joro slumped against the railing, his strength finally giving out. The radiation and exertion had taken their toll. Around him, the chamber was coming apart, panels exploding, support structures collapsing. He'd succeeded in disabling the Vorax weapons, but at the cost of destabilizing the entire ship. As consciousness began to fade, he thought of Kavi and the peaceful life they'd built on Grenell. He'd finally used his abilities for something that mattered, not for an alien master's entertainment, but for the protection of those he cared about. A figure appeared through the smoke and debris, a Zari warrior in full battle armor, mandibles clicking in rage. Defective asset, the warrior hissed, advancing on Joro's weakened form. You will not deny us our rightful conquest. Joro tried to stand, to defend himself, but his body refused to respond. The radiation poisoning and exhaustion had left him vulnerable in a way he hadn't been since childhood. The Zari raised a ceremonial blade, the kind used to execute failed gladiators in the arena. Your components will be recycled, your failure documented. As the blade descended, Joro summoned his last reserves of strength, not for himself, but for what he represented, humanity's refusal to become a weapon for those who would enslave them. With a motion too quick for even the Zari to track, he caught the blade between his palms. My name is Joro, he said through gritted teeth, not asset J7293, and this ends now. With a twist of his wrists, he snapped the blade and drove the fragment into a gap in the Zari's armor. The warrior staggered backward, dark ichor seeping from the wound. Around them, the destruction accelerated. The central plasma core was now completely unstable, its containment fields failing. Joro knew the entire ship would soon follow. Using the railing for support, he dragged himself toward the maintenance tunnel. If he could reach it, maybe, just maybe, he could find his way to an escape pod before the Vorak tore itself apart. The journey back through the tunnel was a nightmare of pain and deteriorating consciousness. Several times, Joro nearly blacked out, forcing himself onward only by focusing on Kavi's face, on the thought of Grenell safe from Zari control. He emerged from the maintenance access to find the engine control room abandoned, emergency lighting casting everything in a blood-red glow. The ship lurched continuously now, its stabilization systems failing as power fluctuated throughout the vessel. Joro staggered into the corridor, following evacuation indicators toward the nearest escape pods. Zari crew ran past him in panic, too concerned with their own survival to notice the human intruder in their midst. After what seemed like hours but was likely only minutes, Joro reached an evacuation bay. Most of the pods had already launched, but one remained, its hatch open, awaiting final passengers. As he dragged himself toward it, a familiar voice called his name.
Joro, here!
Lieutenant Mara stood in the pod's doorway, waving frantically. Behind her, Joro could see Dax and Suri already strapped into acceleration couches. "We couldn't leave without you," Mara explained as she helped him aboard. Dax insisted. The gruff soldier merely grunted, but there was newfound respect in his eyes as he regarded the Ex-Gladiator. "Ship's tearing itself apart," Suri reported from the pilot's seat. "We need to launch now or we're going with it." The escape pod's hatch sealed with a hiss of hydraulics. Moments later, they were ejected from the dying battlecruiser, their small vessel accelerating away from the Vorak as explosions rippled across its massive hull. Through the viewport, Joro watched as secondary detonations consumed the ship that had represented everything he'd escaped 5 years ago. The sight should have brought satisfaction, or at least relief. But he felt only a profound weariness. "Granol Control is responding to our emergency beacon," Suri announced. "Ground forces report the Zari troops are in disarray without the Vorak's coordination." "Coalition reinforcements?" Mara asked. "Still inbound, but we might not need them anymore. The invasion force is retreating." Dax clapped a hand on Joro's shoulder. "You did it, kid. You actually did it." But Joro barely heard him. The radiation poisoning was taking its toll, his enhanced body struggling to repair damage beyond even its capabilities. As darkness crept into the edges of his vision, his last conscious thought was of the fighting pits, and how far he'd come from being a weapon to becoming a shield. Joro awoke to the sterile white ceiling of Grenel's medical facility. The steady beep of monitoring equipment filled the otherwise quiet room. He tried to move and found his body responding sluggishly, as though each limb were weighted down. "Easy there," came a familiar voice. "You've been unconscious for 3 days." He turned his head to find Kavi sitting beside the bed. The old man's weathered face creased with relief. "Pops," Joro whispered, his throat raw. "The colony?" "Safe," Kavi assured him. "The Zari fleet retreated after you destroyed their command ship. Coalition forces arrived yesterday to secure the system." Memory returned in fragments, the Vorak's power core, the radiation, the desperate escape. Mara, the others? "All safe. The lieutenant has been here every day checking on you." Kavi leaned closer, his voice dropping. "The doctors weren't sure you'd survive. The radiation levels you were exposed to should have been fatal." Joro flexed his fingers, feeling strength slowly returning. "They made me too stubborn to die." A sad smile touched Kavi's lips. "That you are boy, that you are—" The door slid open, admitting Dr. Voss and Lieutenant Mara. Both women looked exhausted but relieved to see Joro conscious. "Our miracle patient," Dr. Voss remarked, checking the monitoring equipment. "Your cellular regeneration is unlike anything I've ever witnessed. Another day or two and you might be back on your feet." "How bad is it?" Joro asked. "The colony, I mean—" "We lost the outer settlements," Mara replied. "About 20% of our infrastructure was damaged or destroyed. 47 casualties among military personnel, 16 civilians." Her expression softened. "But it could have been much worse. Without what you did, we might have lost everything." "I just did what needed doing," Joro murmured, uncomfortable with the implied heroism. "That's more than most can say." Mara countered. She hesitated, then added, "There's something else you should know. Coalition Command has taken an interest in you." Joro tensed. "What kind of interest?" "The kind that recognizes your potential." Mara glanced at Dr. Voss, who nodded encouragement. "They're proposing to establish a special tactical unit. People with unique abilities, operating outside standard military protocols to address extraordinary threats." "Like me," Joro realized. "They want to use me as a weapon." "No," Mara said firmly. "Not a weapon. An agent with agency. You would have full autonomy to accept or decline missions, to determine how your abilities are used." Joro looked away. After everything he'd been through, the idea of fighting again, of being deployed against enemies because of what the Zari had made him, felt like returning to the arena. just with a different master. I need time to think, he said finally. Of course, Mara agreed. There's no rush. Coalition Command understands the sensitivity of the situation. After they left, only Kavi remained, his ancient eyes studying his great-grandson with concern. What's on your mind, boy? The old man asked. Joro struggled to articulate the conflict within him. All my life, I've been defined by what the Zari made me. In the arena, I was their perfect gladiator. Here on Grenol, I tried to be just another refugee. Now Coalition Command wants me to be their, whatever, special agent, superhuman soldier. He sighed. When do I get to decide what I am? That's exactly what you're being offered, Kavi pointed out. The choice. Is it really a choice if all the options are shaped by these abilities I never asked for? Kavi considered this. We all have gifts and burdens we didn't choose. Joro, your strength is more obvious than most, but the principle is the same. The question isn't whether you use your abilities, it's how, and for whom. The wisdom in those words settled over Joro like a blanket. His great-grandfather was right. He could spend his life running from what he was, or he could embrace it on his own terms. I need to get out of this bed, he decided. Kavi chuckled. Dr. Voss might have something to say about that. Probably. Help me anyway? With his great-grandfather's assistance, Joro managed to stand, his legs trembling slightly but holding his weight. Together, they made their way slowly through the medical facility and out onto a balcony overlooking the colony. Grenol spread before them, damaged but unbowed. Reconstruction was already underway, with crews clearing debris and repairing infrastructure. Coalition vessels hovered protectively in the sky above, ensuring no further Zari incursions would threaten the settlement. They're calling you a hero, Kavi said, nodding toward a group of children playing in a courtyard below. Their game appeared to involve one child pretending to punch imaginary spaceships while the others cheered. Joro watched them with mixed emotions. I'm not sure that's what I want to be. Perhaps not, Kavi agreed. But it might be what you are, regardless of what you want. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the old man and the engineered boy, united by circumstance and choice rather than blood. Finally, Joro spoke. If I join this special unit, if I use what I am to protect others, I need to know I won't become what the Zari intended, that I won't lose myself in the violence again. Kavi's weathered hand found Joro's shoulder. That's why you have me, boy, to remind you who you are when you forget. The simple promise brought tears to Joro's eyes. In the fighting pits, he'd had no one, no anchor to humanity, no voice of conscience or compassion. But here, now, he had Kavi. He had Mara and the others who'd trusted him despite knowing his origins. I'll speak with Lieutenant Mara tomorrow, he decided. Tell her I'm willing to discuss Coalition Command's proposal. Kavi nodded approvingly. And what will you tell them? Joro looked out at the horizon, where the first stars were becoming visible in the darkening sky. Among them were worlds still under Zari control, places where children like he had been were forced to fight and kill for alien entertainment. That I'll help them, he said quietly, but on my terms, not as a weapon, but as a shield, not to destroy, but to protect. As twilight settled over Grenol, Joro stood straighter, his decision made. The Zari had created him to be a perfect gladiator, a killer for their entertainment. But they had failed to account for the human spirit within him, the capacity for choice that transcended their engineering. He was not what they had made him. He was what he chose to be. And he chose to be more than they had ever imagined possible.